Welcome back to the gallery. We've got a very cool guest today. This is my friend, Michael Van Lier. Mike, we met, I want to say like 2018 in New York City. We had a lot of fun. We had a great meal. Today, we have an interesting topic, and today's topic is about branding and marketing, which are definitely separate things for studios. I have a marketing background, as many of our listeners know here, and I believe fundamentally that there are some terrible marketing and branding going on in the world of studios, and that needs to change. There are very few studios that have marketing people that are founders of it. And I think what Mike and the team are doing at Builders is interesting and different. So we're going to dive into the importance of branding and marketing in today's episode. So really would love to just let's do a quick kickoff, tell us about your studio. Tell us about how you guys went through a rebrand over the recent years. And right before we just started, you mentioned you had a long day, you're losing your voice. Give us a little glimpse of your day-to-day running Builders.
Sure. So first off, Builders, startup studio based in Rotterdam, been around the block, right? So we now build companies for the future of work, right? B2B SaaS companies. Before we did this as independent studio, we were called We Are Builders, right? A bit more boring, I would say. But from our background, we did a lot of, I would say, corporate venture building, you could say that, as We Are Builders. And the reason we did that was very simple. I have a background in software development, agencies. My co-founder has the same, and we've been building companies since, I don't know, age 16 old. I started software development at age 13, right? So you could say, we're little nerds, so we want to build products and companies. First did that under We Are Builders, that brand. And once we got to a point where you're like, okay, so now we're going to do this very seriously, and we're going to use our own capital to build companies, we switched to a new brand. And it's basically the brainchild of Sharon, my co-founder, who said we cannot do the same thing. We have to, give this a more bigger audience. It should be their own brand, right? So we'll dive into that deeper if you'd like. And my day-to-day, buddy, we're studios, right? So there's a few things we always do. We fundraise and we build, right? And we call that building and raising. So I'm responsible for most of the external communications. So I talk to investors, I talk to founders about their issues, why a studio is good or not, and why they should partner with us for the long run. Yep. So most of the time that means 6 to 8 hours of straight talking.
Yep, love it. So I think one thing to delineate early on here is the difference between design, marketing, and branding. I take this very seriously personally. There is a huge difference. A lot of folks will say oh, we have a great brand, but what they're really saying is we have a beautiful logo and we have a cool name and we love our color scheme. We love our fonts that we use on the website. That's great. Your brand is actually how people feel when they think about your company. I have a pretty strong opinion that that's the definition of branding. Marketing is then how you communicate it to them in many ways. Your messaging, your pricing, your packaging, all that. So the first thing I'm really curious about with you guys is, do you think that as a studio, and then also for your studio in particular, you need to approach investors, meaning LPs in the studio, VCs, and potential entrepreneurs with a different brand? Or is it really just one big brand?
Oh, great question. So no, there's two brands actually, also within Builders. So for Builders, we focus mainly on the entrepreneurs, on the founders. And we believe if we attract the right founders, an entrepreneur also sees, or an investor also sees, hey, this is a great place for entrepreneurs to go, so I should be here, right?
Yep.
So all of our branding around that, I would say communications around Builders is mainly focused on co-founders, entrepreneurs.
Yep.
We've also seen great results of that, so that's really important. And then Builders, the brand towards investors, is for us is more an event, right? So we bring together our investors 3 to 4 times a year, and we call that Builders Investor House. And we now actually launched a separate branding, so it's a separate, if you want to call it design, and it's a separate tone of voice. Even everything is different. Just because we focus on them, right? So you get a real clear cut. This is for investors. This is for entrepreneurs.
Well, so let's dig into those more particularly. What types of events are you actually putting on for each cohort of people?
Yeah, so for founders, we don't have events at the moment. We've tried to organize that, but it's a bit weird if you're honest. Right? You're gonna try to get people in the same room who might be in a different position now, and you're trying to convince them to join your studio. It's a real weird conversation to have, basically.
Yeah.
So for the founders, we really focus on how can we get the right brand out there, the right content from from Sharon, the co-founder, from me personally, from builders as a whole, to make sure we reach them. And we now mainly rely on getting inbound, I would say some applications to partner. And the level at this point in time, to give you an understanding, is around 200 of those applications every month.
Yep.
Only works because I believe the brand is at that level.
Yep.
So no events there. For the investors, it's something we evolved into. When we got external investors after we put in our own capital, we started hosting more dinners. And what you would do for investors, what is the first thing you think of? You bring them together, you wine and dine them, they have fun, right?
Yep.
But our investors themselves said to us, you got to make more out of this. I mean, I can wine and dine every evening. So A, bring us new faces. B, give us some challenges to work on so that you can use our intellect or network to grow the studio. And we did both, right? So now they actually challenge us to bring new LPs to every event, meaning you can only come once if you don't invest. It's a weird situation to begin with. So everybody gets asked, did you invest already? But it also helps to make the faces fresh. Everybody loves to come because there's going to be new faces
Yep.
To get to know too. And then secondly, we should bring challenges
Yep.
to those events. We've tried to update a few times, and we've now come to a type of event where we would visit a scale up in our, I would say scope sector, similar kind of businesses. We would fireside chat with those and actually ask them the hard questions, because a studio is about, I would say, as much on failing as in succeeding. We don't talk about that much, but basically you should have 1,000 no's and one yes. That's a studio. So during these conversations, we also focus on what went wrong, why, tell us about it, what's there to learn. And in that sense, we also prime the investors to say, hey, a studio is more than just success. It's also about learnings and how to put that back into your day-to-day. That's the main thing. And after that, we have two challenges. One from the visiting scale-up we're visiting, and second from our portfolio. And again, there's this, for example, we grill our own companies to say, hey, you're going to go get funding. Let's find 20 ways why we think they shouldn't or can't, right? So we're actually going to have that conversation and interact with them. And that format we keep upping till a level where we now get sponsored to do the event and bring our LPs to the event. So those are face-to-face. For the founders, we've never done it. I now believe we will at some point, but not for, let's say, recruitment reasons. More to spread the word, awareness, have fun.
How often are you hosting these events for LPs and investors?
We're getting now to 4 times a year, but it's hard to, it has to be between event season, Christmas, summer break. So we try to squeeze in 4. It really depends on the availability of the companies we're visiting. And it also seems to depend on if we're fundraising ourselves.
Sure.
Right? If we're doing that, it really helps that to give that, not final push, but to build momentum and trust amongst everybody present.
I would assume that you're never really in a situation where you host an event, you put 3 months of work into it, and then you leave, and the next day you have 6 investors. I would assume it's more of this ongoing, slow, like drop in the bucket. It's more this practice that you always have to be doing, and slowly over time, it kind of then ultimately creates an exponential opportunity for investors to jump in. Is that right, or would you describe it in a bit of a different way?
No, yes and no. I would say, looking at our LPs, we would have 2 to 3 conversations at most. So this could be a third conversation, basically.
Yep.
And then we're chasing the no, right? Why not? So I try not to invite some of them too early, because then they'll use that as a second conversation instead of the last one.
Yep.
It happens twice that a LP said after the event, I'm going to do it, and actually did. I've seen signatures put down at the event because that's when they see us. So it's more a meeting to them in general sense. But since we invite new ones every time, it's actually pretty actionable, I would say. But we don't intend it that way. We want to get to know them, get to know the others, all in one go, right? Get the vibes.
Yep. Got it. I want to go circle back to what you mentioned before about attracting entrepreneurs and EIRs. Tell us a bit
Sure.
about the content you're putting out, the stories you're telling. Like, what are you guys doing on a daily or weekly basis that you've seen actually really work? And I'd also love to hear the stories of things that you've tried that have not worked and what you learned from those.
Yeah, I would say they're pretty typical, right? So just to frame it again, we first did We Are Builders as a corporate venture builder. We then sold one of our portfolio companies and put all of that money into being an independent builder. So when we started the brand, I would say 3 years ago, we were already doing studio stuff for 6, and now we're moving forward. We're thinking, okay, what should we do different here? And me and my co-founder really focused on, can this brand be bigger than us, right? How can we scale this thing beyond ourselves? And
Yeah.
we have this, what we call a master plan, and few steps are, for example, build at least 2 companies every year. If you're successful doing that, work towards an exit, and then go to the next city,
Yep.
right? So build more studios. To do that, you need something that scales. So we said to ourselves, can we put ourselves in the limelight to tell them stories, real stories about how a studio operates from within? Can we also do that from Sharon's perspective, more on the operations, talent, and most of the times he also does marketing and brand, right? And from my end, hey, how does a studio work? What's the architecture? Why the model was interesting? But more importantly, so I'd like to give a point of view on how I experience these things and tell a story on, I would say, how it really is. There's a lot of data out there of when it works, but what if it doesn't work? So we decided to do that in a few formats. And as a studio, we just see it as a company, right? So there's a quarterly schedule for content, there's a monthly team.
Yep.
And for example, myself, I would do a day a month where I would just lock myself up and do like a writer's camp. And I would
Yep.
write all the content related to that month subject in one go.
Yep.
And it already says you need like 5 short formats, 1 medium, and a few really short ones. I mostly write those myself. That's why you see that content feels like it's written by myself as well. So yeah, it's the point of view stuff, and we kept doing it for the last 3 years. And if I'm honest, I think with all these things, always in the long run, we're doing it for awareness. It started working, I would say, a year ago, right? All of that we pushed the last few years. It got somewhere, but now it's going places. Talent we're getting in is saying, hey, I saw that article of Sharon about talent and how you do that. I'd love to talk more. Investors are actually saying, I read all your articles, but by the way, I disagree with these 4 things. Can we talk? So now it starts working as I would say, it grows my story towards a
Yep.
bigger audience.
And
So it does.
you're starting conversations, and that's the point.
Well put. Yeah, that's what it does. And it starts the conversation as, I would say, some sort of outbound, but then it scales.
Okay. Little shameless plug. I think most people listening and know that my main thing is I run a company called Thursday, which is a content company for founders, a very specific offering, but I'm not going to get into the details on that. So I bring that up because I could talk content and marketing strategy and all that all day, but I won't. I'll spare you from it, and we'll keep it focused on studios. You mentioned it started working about a year ago. How long did it take before that to get to the point of it started to work?
Yeah, I would say 2 years. And it's also some sort of consistency, right? And doing all the channels at the same time. But also thinking about what are you focusing on, right? So even from my personal LinkedIn profile gets a lot of reach. It was a normal LinkedIn profile, I would say 1.5 years ago. Now it's I think they call it the creator type of profile where people can follow you easier.
Yeah.
That changed a lot, right? So now the reach, the repeatability gets better. So it took us 2 years of full-on writing to get to a point where people were actually now asking for content instead of us pushing it.
It sounds, the way I'd sum it up in the framing we do at Thursday Labs is you developed the amount of thought leadership that you needed to grow your company and your personal brand. Took about 2 years of consistent work to like really see drastic, meaningful results, and now it changed the game for you guys. Is that accurate?
Yes, but I would say as builders, we trust in our data. So
Yeah.
basically, we're looking at our yearly KPIs, which we want to reach. And this could be, for example, how many entrepreneurs, reach out to us. This could be,
Yep.
how many people see these kind of events, and that trickled back down. So we started with the end in mind, and then saying, okay, then we might need these types of content.
Yeah.
And now I actually quite enjoying it, Jake. So now I love to write a piece of content, and just it only takes me a few hours to get 4 of them on paper.
Sure. I did have a question actually that I wanted to ask about KPIs, but you brought it up first. I'm really curious. Are there any very specific, almost like weird or niche KPIs that you're tracking to measure the success of your branding efforts? And then are there any KPIs that you thought would be relevant that actually are not really that relevant? An example I can share is years ago at the first studio I was at, I mean, we're talking like 6, 7, maybe 8 years ago, we would track, well, how many coffee meetings would we have with founders on a weekly basis? It was like, well, if we have 500 coffee meetings a month and we get one founder out of it, but if we have 30 coffee meetings a month and we get one founder out of it, then it's like not tracking the number of meetings is not the best KPI. It's probably more the percentage that's the best KPI. So really curious how you guys think about, at the end of the day, all that really matters is that you're like getting great founders to build great companies. But there's a million ways to do that. How are you measuring it?
Yeah, I would say, look, we're basically going for awareness all day long, right? So we want to amplify what we're doing, and everything we're doing gets better if this gets bigger. So a specific KPI would be, right, we're going to sign 10 LPs in this time period. And that's a goal that, I own.
Yep.
But the team will also look at, okay, so from a growth, marketing, and everything perspective, what can we do to help? And then that KPI would be, all right, so we want 5 inbounds in this amount of time. We would look at that quarterly, run experiments and say, okay, we got 2 inbounds. What was the quality? Can we start working on that? And 2 is already pretty nice for some of the content we do, right? So that's a normal KPI. The rest is just awareness to keep building that. I would say more like a fun story, right? So we put out a meme, 2 weeks ago. And the team said, hey, Mike, I think your profile could also do a meme around what's happening in startup studios. And the KPI was, right, if it does any better than a normal post in terms of reach and reactions and what it yields, we'll do it again, because, I was a bit doubtful.
What was the meme? If you mind me asking, what did the meme say?
Oh, it was a Drake meme. It was content I already wrote about my thoughts on corporate venture building, and I believe we're better off just doing some gigs and getting some cash in. They added a meme to it. Right, it went way beyond our normal reach. It's now the number 1 post in the last year. We get 1 investor inbound, 2 people want to do some services, and a few founders, right? The thing works.
Yeah.
So I think my thought here is just go wild, experiment, and if it doesn't work, shelve it. But if it does work, we might do it again.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from empowering the team, not because we have this strategy. It is because the team said, hey, can we go a bit wild once in a while? Sure, right? If the content is still the same, point of view, with an opinion, right? I'm good. That works.
Let's talk about the team. What does your team look like on the marketing and outreach side of things, and how did you land on that structure and that team?
Yeah, great question. We shifted around a bit, right? So at this point in time, we have a full-time designer that does product design and brand, not only for us, but
the whole portfolio.
Yeah, for builders in all of the portfolio, right? So when we start building, let's say, a minimal viable company, that's also his signature. So that's in-house to begin with. Then we would have at least somebody on no-code, right? Building websites, landing pages, all that stuff. You would have somebody on social strategies saying, hey, it's got to be within these frames. I need more of this and that. And demand content, for example, from me, myself, or founders. We now call them venture builders. We don't give them the name, digital product design or growth marketeer. It's a venture builder with a specialization on something. And then even our interns work on publishing that content. So I
Yeah.
would say more or less 3 to 4 people touch it, right, in any given day, to make it work. And it's part of every Monday morning meeting. It's also a goal we need to achieve.
Yeah.
So we tried around a bit, but we don't have specializations on that anymore, other than like the dedicated brand and design.
Yeah. I met this guy recently, and he said a quote that I absolutely love, and I'll try to kind of work through it slowly because it's a bit complicated. But he said, the greatest asset a new team or a new studio or a new startup can have is being understood. I was like, that's interesting. Let me think about that. And what I kind of gathered from it, just to break it down a bit more, is like there's so much shit that gets launched on a daily basis in the startup world these days, and there's more than enough happening in the studio world these days. Everyone's trying to build the next big thing, and they get all in their heads about, well, how are we different? How are we changing the world? So they write this very overcomplicated copy. No one understands what they do when they go to their website, so they just leave. Huge bounce rate. They can't raise money. They can't get customers. No one understands what they do, why they're different, what the problem is they actually solve. Oftentimes, because the person who wrote the website is the engineer. Don't do that, people. And and then they fail. But it's like,
Yeah.
what if you were able to just really, really clearly communicate with your words, with your logo, with your colors, with your events, with your content, what you're doing, and people understand it and they get it, and you're just getting going? Well, now you maximize your chances of raising money, getting meetings with investors, like finding a team to hire. And then as a studio, like, number one, people need to understand what the hell is a studio if they're even going to take a meeting with you, let alone like what role are we going to play together. How do you think that new studios can most efficiently, quickly, even cheaply become understood right out of the gates when they have no money to spend, they have not raised a fund yet, but they want to go start a studio?
I have a very strong opinion on this. So I believe, those starting studios, let's say until they built the first 4 or 5 companies, let's call them emerging studios. After that, let's call them mature. I think in emerging, I mean, you're basically screwed, right? Whatever you say, in terms of content, it probably won't be understood, right? I think you're in a great time that now more and more of the ecosystem, but also investors, now have heard about studios. It seems to gain a lot of popularity in the last, I would say, 6 to 8 months. If you would do this 2 years ago, you just have to explain what you actually built and never call it a studio. Nowadays, I think you could call it a studio. I think you could clearly communicate, but you should use less words. That means for emerging studios, nobody's going to land on your website, nobody's going to look at it. And what I've seen from my experience, tell your own story, right? So on your website, just say, I built companies for the future of work. Sure. We, for example, say we turn the daily grind into a joy for millions. Right, that's the story starter. What are you saying? What do you mean with grind? What's going on there?
Yeah.
And use that story as your point of reference to talking to founders and investors. Because until you get those first results, those first company built, whatever you say is basically you envisioning a future, but it hasn't happened yet. So there's way more power in the story. And I should have known this, before, than there is in trying to communicate all the nuances of a studio model. Because in all honesty, it's way too difficult for people to understand and digest. And with communicating with people, I would say even with investors, you want them to say, yes, let's talk more. So it has to be short, concise, to the point. So don't even bother trying to go wide. Just tell them, you build these kind of companies because my background is, I've been in bio my whole life. So I built bio companies. Great, let's go.
Yeah.
I think that's how simple it should be, but it's the hardest thing ever. And I've effed that up a million times before. We got it semi-right. And it's still, I would say it's still a journey for us to figure out how to make everything simpler and more understood.
Yep. I'd actually love to hear some stories if you're willing to share something crazy. I mean, early days, you were early in studio world to begin with, which is pretty funny. Like, I think anyone who was in the studio world pre 2020 was like early, which was just a few years ago. I mean, you've been in it for much longer than that. You've seen the ups and downs of the space. You built the studio post exit for yourself. Tell us about something crazy that went wrong early on when you guys were getting going, that maybe you came close to quitting, or You came close to questioning your entire existence. I think any founder or potential studio GP out there could use a little comfort these days with those stories.
Oh man, there's one I can't tell you because it's for regulations, but I really want to. That's a story that comes to mind. Yeah, a lot of shit to embrace.
Maybe next time we're at the same restaurant, we can talk about it over some wine.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to, right? No, of course. I think we've been close to saying, hey, this is not going to work, and is this actually gaining the right value to do that? There's been a few times where you would look at, money invested, time invested, and are we getting the right outputs? And it's really important to note with this model, you basically have a time window of 1 to, I would say, 4 years in which you need to go to setting up the first few things that don't work, making them better, know when to say no. And then you get into, okay, hey, this is working, that is working, this is not, let's optimize. I mean, we've optimized so much that we even, threw away a part of our focus. We said, hey, we're going to build companies for the future of work and living. We said, no, let's only focus for now on the future of work. You need to get these things right and get the right metrics. So when you almost quit is when you get to that point where you put all the money to work, you're looking at the results, and you say, is this actually worth it? And then you should say to yourself, F it, you made this model to do the first 2 years to learn, the next 2 to actually build and grow. And I think a lot of studio founders in the space now are at that point, and they should focus on, can I build a better place for founders, for investors to get to the next level? But it's fairly easy to go and sit on the chair of your, portfolio founder's seat and think, oh, where should we go from here? So I want to say crazy stories in that sense, right? But you get to that point where you actually believe, is this actually the right way? And the problem with that is very simple, and it's related to messaging and brand. If you are not communicating, this is a thing for the long run, at least 4 years, and depending on structure, this is open-ended. It might take 10 years of fun and joy, but we're going to make some F-ups along the way, and we're going to have some no's. If you don't communicate that directly at the point because you're blossoming, and of course you're enthusiastic, you're making it beautiful. I mean, you know me. I also like to have these super accolades going out there. You shouldn't. You should tell them your point of view, what's happening, why, and be very transparent about that. I think it's way too easy to F this up, if I'm honest. So focus there. And that story, it will come someday.
Sure. I was talking to a friend yesterday about this, and he's in the studio world, kind of in and out of it. And we were just recollecting how 6 years ago, 9 out of 10 people, when you'd say, like, I run a startup studio, I work at a startup studio, whether they were VCs or entrepreneurs, they would say, what's a studio? No one knew what it was. Yep. Today, 99% of those same people know what it is. But everyone has a slightly different opinion on it and a slightly different definition of it. And it's funny because even you said this to me earlier. We do things a bit differently. I want to talk about that. Every single studio I talk to says we do things a bit differently, which means they all do the same thing, which is their own version of it. So I'm curious, in your opinion, well, actually, I'll back up for a second. What my friend then said yesterday was, because I'm so happy that studios are finally an asset class. Like, now everyone knows what they are. And I thought about that, and I was like, that's funny, because 5 years ago I said studios are an asset class, and now I don't think studios are an asset class for a few reasons. Do you think studios can be considered an asset class today?
That would imply it's very standardized and similar. It's not, right? So I don't think so. I think there's a lot of great examples of awesome studios who've been around, 10 plus years, and they've made all those results, and everybody knows them, thousands of jobs. Yeah, of course. If you put those in a bracket, you could say this is some sort of class because they're very similar because they matured till that model.
Yeah,
I would say these days we're looking at slowly going into something that looks the same. But isn't that this point in time? I've been part of all kinds of standardization work groups where we try to make the legal side or the structuring side as advice, like, hey, can we all do it this way? But we don't. But I do believe at some point when you say, hey, most studios start from a small pile of money, maybe in a holdco, build a few companies, and then start growing into, hey, we do a regulated fund that invests in studio and the portfolio that comes out of it. From that point of view, you could say, hey, those kind of funds are different, and you could put them in a group, right? Those I believe. But saying that all those, let's say, studio operational companies are the same, or if you just invest in 10, they all have the same kind of outcomes. No, they don't. And I
Yeah.
don't know if they should at this point in time, if I'm honest. To me, it feels like there's a different type of investor in your first few years and within your operational company. Those are entrepreneurs, high net worths, family offices, people, guys, girls who know how to build these companies, and they love to invest direct into that. And then there's LPs for your fund, for your later cycle, that really fit that kind of regulated fund. They know what they're getting into. There's way more structure to it, but those are not the same people. I mean, I hope so, but I rarely see it. So we don't have to, right? Find a few, I would say angel high networks that really fit you, your scope, and your team, just like with a normal company, normal startup. And then when you go to the fund, I don't think it matters that much. It's, you already have your track record and everything. You're just going to run it differently. So no, I'm not pushing for it. I don't know why we should. Every time I pushed for selling the studio as an asset class, I'm basically trying to sell an entire industry to an investor.
Right.
But but I'm trying to tell our story, and I want to get them on board and make sure that we do great things together. So I just think you're doing yourself a disservice. I mean, unless you want other studios, to find you cool, which I don't think is your goal. We don't have to push it.
Yeah. It's interesting because you kind of already alluded to the next question I wanted to ask, which is, do you think that there's a broader branding issue for studios as a whole? Or does it not matter right now?
I think it really depends. So I could tell you a story. So we're talking to a founder from abroad to maybe start the business here with us. Very accomplished entrepreneur, and she, in this case, said to us, "Look, the reason I'm talking to you guys is because you're one of the few studios where the partners are actively hands-on working, within the studio and have a role there." And the reason I believe or know that is because I've seen your content out there, I've seen your point of view. Those are learnings from the trenches. That's the reason why I think you guys are the best fit for me. And what I've seen from other studios, they're so far away that I'm second guessing if the value is the same as it is perceived. So I don't think I have a branding issue. It's just what kind of founder you want to attract. If it's, if your studio is really well known for their results, they did a big exit or whatever, they will come either way. But if you're still building towards that level, it might be really good for them to know who they're going to work with, and preferably the people that have that story, the reason, their why did they start that studio. Those are the ones they should relate with. And to be very honest, we put that even in our playbooks. There's an entire, I would say, 50-minute read on our background and why we started doing this. And we feel like you should read that so that we know,
Yeah,
you fit the DNA. So not an issue. Depends what you want to attract.
totally. What's next for builders? And give us a little call to action here.
Whoa. What's next for builders? So we recently changed strategies to build 4 companies a year.
Okay.
What's new is that we're also allowing entrepreneurs, that have an actual tangible problem they faced, to apply to builders and try to build a company with us. And the difference here is that what's new is we're really asking them to describe their problem, when they experienced it, if it's only one time and it's really big, and why they believe they should fix it. I think that's a bit different, and the solution there should be within scope, of course, the future of work. That's something we've been working on, and we're now getting so many applications to the door. We're looking still for a way to process them the right way, but we're giving them all the same kind of attention. So that's really new to us, to find that, I would say, niche. Second thing really new is, in the past, we would match a CEO to a CTO in a 20-week process. First 4 weeks will be, hardcore validation. But over 20 weeks, in the end, we would also recruit and find the CTO. We do have a lot of great inbound and network there. So, we do like 100 CTOs there, I would say, because the brand has a lot of reach. By the way, we just use LinkedIn ads, right? But, use that to basically make the ad go even further than your own brand, and then they'll find your brand. So instead of getting those 100 in every time we have a new company to build, we're now actively recruiting CTOs and residents, which we're allowing in the studio. So at least 4 to 5 at the same time are there. They're working on our internal projects, but also there to talk to the new business founders who come in, inspire them, figure out what they're doing, do some prototyping. So we're now getting to a point where we have all the ingredients all the time. That's new to us, but also, high energy helps, and I believe gets the brand, more spoken about to begin with. So that's new. And of course, we start a new fundraise, but I would feel like every studio is fundraising all the time. So I don't know if that's really new. Yeah.
Sure. Anything else you want to get out to the world today about builders or your story?
Sure. I think I just said it, right? We're actively looking for entrepreneurs who could really describe a problem in the world they should want to solve. Should be, of course, future of work related, but those who really want to get in. And I think related to that, the investors we're now getting in should also feel like, hey, this studio model is a new way of putting capital to work, which helps the entrepreneurs get to the next level. And I believe with some de-risking with the studio, they should get there. I would really advise them to look at a few studios. To make our brand bigger, we even set up something called the Studio Fundraise Map, where these investors could sign up, and we would connect them to at least 10 studios instead of just to us. So I just invite them all. Have a look at this model, and if you want, there's tons of studios who can educate you to look for the right metrics, and I would love to do that for any investor.
Yep. Awesome. Well, that's all for us today. Thank you so much for coming on, man. This is a really cool episode. I really love this discussion.